Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 13, and it feels like we've been waiting an eternity for some marquee matchups, but we have one of the best NFL slates, arguably, of the last 6 to 8 weeks on tap for you today. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, we've bitched and moaned about trying to find 5 games to break down on a lot of these Thursdays. This week, we couldn't even pare the list down. We got 6 games to get to on today's show.
6 big games. A little more work for us, a little better listen for our loyal fan base. This is a great card. I'm actually juiced for this, and we have a Thursday night game that we can actually look forward to and a lot of marquee matchups. Still not sure why we didn't get a flex for Sunday Night Football, but we'll break down the Colts and Cowboys a little bit as
the
well.
only reason I think we didn't get that flex is because when the Cowboys are on in prime time, the networks are going to do everything they can to keep them there when Dallas is remotely relevant. But trust me, I'd have loved if we saw the 49ers and Dolphins flex to Sunday Night Football, but at least for Dolphins fans, they'll get to see them in Sunday night a week from this week when they take on the Los Angeles Chargers. Before we get into all the games, though, and like you talked about, a great game on Thursday night that'll go a long way in defining the pecking order in the AFC East, wanted to bring up some of our contest winners from our Thanksgiving giveaway. I know there's a lot of folks out there that only tune into the NFL or only tune into college football, so I'll let you share some of those names that are now $100 richer.
Yes, we mentioned this on the college pod yesterday, but we can rehash again today. We gave out $300 for a Thanksgiving contest, $100 to each winner. All you had to do was retweet the podcast for Thanksgiving. And generally speaking, right, just if you like the podcast, help us. It grows. Retweet it, even if you have 10 followers, 50 followers, 75 followers. It helps the algorithm. But we gave out $100 to each of these members. The first one is at K_Harward. His name's Kyle. At Football Sean. And then at Gooner's Dream. So we'll reach out here in the next 48 hours, get those guys compensated. But those are your 3 winners for the Thanksgiving contest
I
giveaway.
did see some of our loyal listeners as well. I'm not sure if it was Spotify or Apple when you have your top podcast that you've listened to. Love seeing Bet the Board in that top slot. Appreciate all the feedback, the interaction that you guys provide on social media. It's really great to go back and forth on some of these games. If you have questions, by all means, fire them at will. All right, my friend, Thursday Night Football. Foxborough, Massachusetts. The New England Patriots, home underdogs against the division rival in the Buffalo Bills. We've seen this number come down considerably from where it opened, 5.5 at the peak. We're now looking at some 3 flats out there, 3.5 more or less the prevailing number. The total down a touch as well from 45 at the top of the market to 43.5. What's at stake here? The Bills, current 5 seed in the AFC. They are tied for the best record in the AFC East, though. Meanwhile, the Patriots on the outside looking in, 1 game behind the Bengals and Jets. This is the first meeting since the playoff game we saw in Orchard Park, New York, last season, a game that New England Patriots fans would like to forget. The Bills knocked off New England 47-17, with the Bills becoming the first team in playoff history with a touchdown in their first 7 drives of the game. The Bills were the first team in playoff history without a punt, field goal, or turnover. Most points allowed by Bill Belichick team in the regular season or playoffs. When you look at Josh Allen, put up gaudy numbers there. Second highest passer rating in playoff history, behind only Peyton Manning, who achieved a perfect rating back in 2004. If you're looking for a couple of trends before we get into the X's and O's, the last 6 matchups between these teams, 4-1-1 to the over. The one game that came in was played with 100-mile-an-hour winds, or so it felt like. Josh Allen, 9-3 straight up, 8-4 ATS in 12 career primetime starts. And the Patriots this season, well, 20 has been their magic number. When they allow under 20 points, 6-0. When they allow more than 20 points, like they did on Thanksgiving, 0-5. Payne, Buffalo has looked like a shell of themselves, but they're still winning games. So it's obviously premature to hit the panic button or anything along those lines. New England, on the defensive side, they've been great bullies when they step down in class, and we've seen them put together dominant performances. But were there things that raised red flags when we saw them play on Thanksgiving last week against the Minnesota Vikings that the Bills can exploit here tonight on Thursday Night Football?
I think in general, you mentioned this line move, and that's really the best place to start this, going from 5.5 down to 3.5, and there's even a handful of soft 3.5 and even some 3s in this market. And I think what you're kind of hinting at is the trending performance for Buffalo, also dealing with some injuries. And I just think the spot in general that a lot of people probably aren't thinking about. This is the Bills' 4th game in 18 days. One of those games was 5 quarters. Josh Allen doesn't appear to be 100% with this UCL issue. You can kind of see some of that in the short throwing metrics. Von Miller's out. The starting left tackle, Deion Dawkins, is out. And then if you do some reading or get some intel early in the week, a flu bug hit the Buffalo Bills locker room. So that's how we got here. In terms of the Bills' offense against Belichick and the Patriots, this is probably one of the largest matchups in terms of variance this week for me. You're just kind of waiting for Buffalo to get back right offensively, but if you look at their offense, they're just trending poorly relative to expectation. 12th in EPA per play over this 3-game stretch. I think I mentioned Monday in passing about Josh Allen's woes in the red zone. He's been one of the worst red zone quarterbacks during this window as well. I think the red zone performance inevitably reverts closer to the expectation, but it's just been, quarterback 40 since week 8. It's of any quarterback that's had at least 2 passes into the red zone. So that's wild to me. You also look at the defenses that Buffalo's played during this downswing, and it makes the offensive performance a little more worrisome to me, right? It's Minnesota, Cleveland, Detroit. Those are defenses 23, 29, and 24 in schedule-adjusted efficiency. And whether it's the shot wearing off for Josh Allen or it's Ken Dorsey not being able to make the right halftime adjustments, the Bills since week 8, 31st in drives that end in touchdown in the second halves of these games since week 8. So the adjustments might not be there as well. You get this Belichick Patriots defense, and you mentioned this as well. I agree with you. They're second in schedule adjusted efficiency. It doesn't quite feel that good. Since week 7, they're first in both EPA per play allowed and success rate allowed. I just, the offenses since week 7, that New England's played leave a lot to be desired, right? It's the Jets with Zach Wilson twice. It's Sam Ehlinger. It's the Bears who
gashed them.
Kind of, turn them upside down. Minnesota is even below average offensively, and Belichick got to play them on a short week, and Kirk Cousins carved them up. I mean, Cousins completed over 81% of his passes on Thanksgiving, second highest mark against the Belichick-led Patriots defense all time. So there are some chinks in this Patriots defensive armor here. I think if you give the market even the slightest bit of respect and you are looking at some context clues, the Patriots steaming at the same time the under is, it leads you to believe Belichick and the Patriots hold the Bills offense in relative check. It was interesting to see how much man coverage the Lions used on Thanksgiving against Buffalo. The Patriots typically live in man, but they haven't fared overly well against this Buffalo offense playing man. So I'm just interested to see what Belichick comes up with here. But I just wonder, back to my point of variance, at what point does Buffalo's offense trend back up? Are we at the floor? And then at the same time, it's I don't for a second believe the Patriots are the second best defense in the league. So it makes this a difficult handicap as we talk about it in the current landscape of the market, right? I mean, the lines call it 3.2 right now. It's certainly a different conversation if we were having this Monday when the line was 5.5.
Yeah, I mean, look, you raised some excellent points talking about the Bills and trying to figure out if this offense is fundamentally broken or what can go on and what may be contributing to some of their struggles right now. Clearly, they've gotten a little bit more effective running the football in recent weeks, but it hasn't exactly been this high-powered offense that we've grown accustomed to. I'm surprised when they made the trade Payne for Nyheim Hines that he hasn't done much of anything in this offense if you're looking for a little bit of a change of pace. But as Josh Allen struggles with some of the shorter passes, it changes a lot of the dimensions mention there. Meanwhile, on the other side, when you look at New England, I mean, this Pats offense isn't lighting the world on fire, but Mac Jones does come into this week's contest off a career high in passing yards, 382 in the loss against the Vikings. It was his second best performance in yards per attempt and fourth in passer rating. When you look at what made him so successful against Minnesota, it was one of the first times this year we've seen New England really throw the ball downfield, and he was 16 of 20 for 243 yards when he was targeting his wide receivers. No Damian Harris, which means Ramondre Stevenson becomes the bell cow back, and he was another guy that benefited immensely last week. Targeted 10 times with 9 catches for 76 yards, and he's had 50-plus receiving yards in 4 of his last 5 games. The other reason for optimism for New England on the offensive side, they may get a couple of key cogs back in the trenches with David Andrews trending in a very positive direction.
So I think what's quietly unnoticed is the Bills' defense is also dipping at the same time the offense is. Since week 7, you're looking at a unit that's 25th in EPA per play allowed since their bye. And so I understand the injuries have been ridiculous for Buffalo. Micah Hyde's out. Tre'Davious White just returned. Greg Russo and A.J. Epinesa have missed some time, although both should be back tonight. Ed Oliver's missed time. Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano have missed games. Von Miller's now out, right? The list kind of goes on and on. But you have a defensive-minded coach. And during this downswing defensively since week 7, the offenses the Bills have faced have an average EPA rank of 18th. So it's not like they've played this great stretch of offenses. So that, to me, is a little bit concerning. And I do wonder at what point we may see a difference of opinion here on this total now that we're below the key of 44. It'll be interesting to see how that market ultimately unfolds from now until kickoff. But you mentioned New England's offense. They are dealing with some injuries of their own. Isaiah Wynn, Damian Harris are out. It does look like Jacoby Myers and David Andrews are going to play. They both vowed to play, even though they've logged limited practices all week. Trent Brown is dealing with an illness and is suddenly questionable as well, so we'll have to monitor that one leading up to kickoff. But I think there's some internal optimism from the Patriots that Mac Jones is getting back into form, that he's playing within the confines of the offense, that he's doing the things they wanted him to do, and ultimately that's what had caused some contention earlier on in the season and why they transitioned to Bailey Zappi for a sneeze. Listen, if you look at kind of the last 3 games, 0 interceptions, just 1 turnover-worthy play for Mac Jones. So he's keeping control of the ball. He's been uber accurate, top 5 in completion percentage over expectation during this 3-game stretch. And the 3 defenses in that sample, on average, are about 13th in schedule adjusted efficiency, and 2 of the 3 games were in inclement weather. So you do kind of like the way Mac Jones is trending here a little bit. I think it's important for New England to not get stale offensively, and they can do that at times. Obviously, Matt Patricia, not very good. And we've seen Buffalo change their style defensively against the Patriots. And, New England's been kind of predictable in some of these matchups in recent memory here. And typically the Bills will live in too high shell. If you look at any metrics, any percentage of defenses that they've played, like they live in zone, they live in too high. But against the Patriots, they've used a little bit more man coverage. They try to clog the middle of the field. They defend all of the crossing and dig routes. I think if you're New England, it's really important to get Devontae Parker and even Nelson Aguilar into the mix, running some deeper routes in this game, open some things up. Because if you're just going to have Mac Jones throwing over the middle, it hasn't really been the recipe. If you look at Buffalo also in terms of their run defense, they've shown some improvements in the underlying metrics, but there's also some things that have causing a little bit of concern, right? I mean, they've done good stopping the explosive run, but 47% of runs have grade successful since week 7. So I think it's really important here the Patriots get the ground game going. They've also struggled to defend a specific style of run, and that's when opposing offenses pull their blockers. And you can kind of see some of that aggressiveness from the defensive line get used against them with counters and some trap runs, and I think you'll see the Patriots employ some of those tonight, especially if the offensive line is a touch healthier, specifically David Andrews. And so, if you're also, it's just very weird because you just look at this number, it's like, hey, the Bills have improved defensively against the run. They're top 10 in schedule adjusted efficiency, but there's just ways to attack them. And again, if you use some pulls and some traps and some counters, Buffalo's allowing over 5 yards per rush against those styles of runs. You mentioned Ramondre Stevenson a little bit. At this point in the season, Buffalo struggled to defend running back passes. They're 22nd in that regard in terms of defensive efficiency against running back passes. That seems to be Stevenson's specialty. He's over 25% of the Patriots' targets since week 7. He's caught 85% of those targets for 7 yards per target. I think you make Buffalo defend him out in space. He's kind of this Brahma bull out there, right? Force Buffalo to be good tacklers, something that they haven't shown. Buffalo's 30th in tackling this season. You can break a bunch of tackles on the Bills. So I think that's the way to maybe attack this defense, is get Stevenson in open space, catching some balls out of the backfield and force a poor tackling team to make some tackles there. So those are the paths, I think, for success for New England's offense. Kind of get your linemen pulling and trapping in the run game, and get Ramondre Stevenson out in the pass catch game. Get some of your receivers running deeper routes and having Mac attack that way as opposed to the short intermediate stuff. And you could have some success here offensively.
Should be a hell of a game to watch. So much in the way of X's and O's, revenge on the mind of New England, their season hanging in the balance. And to your point, we keep waiting for this Buffalo team to break through and show us why they were the heavy favorites to win the Lombardi Trophy, the first in franchise history coming into the season. So curious to see how this plays out. The nice part about getting the Thursday game the week after Thanksgiving, both teams on normal rest. So we're not talking about a short week in play here. From Thursday to Sunday, though, a team in the AFC East competing with both the Bills and the Patriots for divisional supremacy would be the New York Jets. And you're looking at the Minnesota Vikings welcoming them into U.S. Bank Stadium. It's the Vikings, a 3-point home favorite. Total in the game, 45. This total has been on the move from where it opened. 41.5, 42, more or less the prevailing numbers, up through the key of 44. As far as the side, we're looking pretty consistent from where it opened. Scenarios in play here, the Jets, currently the 7th seed in the AFC, still seeking their first playoff appearance since 2010, trying to effectively end an 11-year playoff drought. Meanwhile, something that I didn't think any Vikings fan believed was possible, the first weekend in December, with a Vikings win and a Detroit Lions loss in Week 13, the Vikings will clinch the NFC North. The matchup to watch in this one, Payne, I'm not exactly splitting the atom or telling people what they don't already know. Good on good, Justin Jefferson, second most receiving yards in the NFL this season with more than 1,200, against Sauce Gardner, the talented rookie out of Cincinnati who's got the highest PFF coverage grade in the National Football League this season. Something has to give. Where the Jets' fewest points allowed in the fourth quarter, it's actually been Minnesota's one of their best quarters with the most points scored in the fourth. Gardner against Jefferson, and I think when you look at all this, people want to talk about Mike White and what he means to the Jets offense. For me, it boils down to the Jets defense and how they defend arguably the best receiver in the National Football League.
So I think, we decided to break this game down. We understood its importance in the pecking order of Week 13 games. We usually do a key factor for something like this, so we'll move a little quicker, but I do have one for each side of the ball. I'll start where you left off. And you're right, you kind of position this as this heavyweight fight that we all want to see between two of the better young players at their positions in this league. And it's appointment television, Justin Jefferson and Sauce Gardner. And I think when you look at this, it's probably impossible to remove Justin Jefferson completely. But if you can hold him below expectation, it's going to go a long way to kind of dealing with this Vikings offense. And I dug into this yesterday morning because it was intriguing to me, and I wanted to kind of deliver it at a little bit of a higher rate than what you'll hear probably other places. But the one thing that is noticeable is Kevin O'Connell. You have to give him credit because he smartly moved Justin Jefferson around the formation. He understands that teams are trying to remove him. And so if you look where Jefferson's lined up, right, it's wide left, it's wide right, it's in the slot, it's at tight end, shit, it's even in the backfield sometimes, you name it. And you have to give O'Connell credit for that. Now, Sauce Gardner hasn't typically traveled. He did travel for one game that was against Stephon Diggs and the Buffalo Bills. I would expect Sauce travels a little bit to mirror Jefferson more frequently than we've seen against other receivers. And that could play a big role here. I mean, he's graded out the very best cornerback in the NFL through 12 weeks, is allowing a 43% reception rate and a 47 passer rating when targeted. And you go back the last 2 seasons, there's 14 times Justin Jefferson has gone over 100 receiving yards. The Vikings are 12-2 in those games. The 14 games Justin Jefferson has failed to eclipse 100 yards. The Vikings are 5-9 in those games. So Jefferson isn't just getting cheap yards in garbage time playing catch up. He's basically the barometer to the offense and team success the Vikings have. So that's something to really look for here. You mentioned Mike White, and I do think it's worth discussing because he does give the Jets an upgrade. I think that's very clear. The offense is kind of mechanical, and if you look at White, he did have 2 turnover-worthy throws, neither led to an interception. The Bears' defense is going to finish dead last in the league in schedule-adjusted efficiency when the dust settles. Probably isn't the best test, so I'm not ready to put Mike White in the Hall of Fame quite yet, even though Jets fans seem to be.
Well, I mean, to Jets fans' credit, Payne, they haven't had much to get excited about at the quarterback position, so they're looking for anything to try and rally around when it comes to a reliable pivot in some capacity.
And I think to their point, there is room for the Jets' offense to improve. I know there's been some injuries on the offensive side of the ball with Hall going down and Vera Tucker going down, so you kind of do have a ceiling that you can reach with that offensive line. But Mike White knows where the ball needs to go. He can distribute on time. The schedule of defenses moving forward seemed to be pretty much a breeze, so it wouldn't shock me if Mike White has some success. We mentioned that on Monday. It's like sometimes these things just pair perfectly where you bring in this new guy, he's going to give a little bit of a jolt of life to the offense. At the same time, you play a bunch of schlubs defensively and everything looks better than it probably is. If you look at the Jets, they've actually fought quite well when going against defenses in their own weight class. So, the Jets right now, if you look on the surface, right, they faced a top 5 schedule of defenses. But even with Zach Wilson, when the Jets offense has played defenses like Cleveland and Miami and Chicago and Green Bay, they've hung 27 or more points in each of those games. Those 4 defenses have an average schedule adjusted efficiency rank of 24th. This week, the Jets get number 23 Minnesota, and we've talked about this for a couple of weeks now. If you make the correct manual tweaks to the Vikings defense, they're worse than 23rd. There's also an interesting matchup here. And the one area where the Vikings defense has been good is against the run. It does look like Carter is trending in the right direction, even though we thought that could be a multi-week injury at the top of the week. But let's just say Carter's out or limited, and you're dealing with all of these backup running backs potentially going up against a good run defense. What you're going to want to use is play action. And the Jets use that quite frequently. Top 10 rate since week 6. That only increased last week with Mike White under center. 37% play action rate against the Bears. The one defense in the NFL that's the most sensitive to play action, it's the Minnesota Vikings. They're dead last on the season in EPA per pass attempt allowed, 2 play action passes. So I think that's going to go a long way for Mike White and the Jets offense to continue their success against a very overrated Minnesota Vikings defense that's now dealing with even more injuries to their secondary. We know Cam Dantzler is on IR, and now the rookie Booth out of Clemson, he's going to be missing in this game as well.
Yeah, you get Dalvin Tomlinson potentially back to anchor that defensive line, but look, Minnesota's been good against the run even without him. I'm sure they would much prefer reinforcements coming in the back end. Interesting nugget here when you look at Garrett Wilson in his rookie campaign. He has 4 touchdown catches so far this season, 2 from Joe Flacco, 2 last week against Mike White, and 0 from Zach Wilson. So when you're talking about keeping some of your talented rookies happy, Garrett Wilson obviously the beneficiary, and we finally get some productivity from Elijah Moore as well. We'll see if that carries forward on the road in this particular game. From Minneapolis to Philadelphia, where the Philadelphia Eagles will take on the Tennessee Titans, and this number's been on the move throughout the course of the week. We'll call Philadelphia a 5-point favorite. The consensus here, total in the game sits at 44.5. The Titans, well, they haven't been shy about saying they may be using A.J. Brown's tweet back in Week 9 as bulletin board material for this renewal of acquaintances. When you're looking at the Tennessee Titans, they have now covered 5 straight games away from home. Mike Vrabel's been outstanding as an underdog, especially catching 4 or more, 13-3 in a 16-game sample size. And when you look at 2 teams trending in different directions from a totals perspective, the Titans, they've gone under in 7 of 8 games. The Philadelphia Eagles over in 5 of 6. Tennessee comes into this fresh off of a 20-16 loss against the Cincinnati Bengals. We highlighted the special teams snafu that cost them an opportunity to get the ball back with under 2 minutes left last weekend in Nashville. Meanwhile, Philly, their offense exploded against the Green Bay Packers, but there were some red flags on the defensive side of the ball in their 40-33 victory. Payne, when you look at Philadelphia and Tennessee as they're currently constructed, I'll give you the opportunity. I'm not sure which matchup intrigues you more, watching Derrick Henry and the play-action pass led by Ryan Tannehill against Philadelphia, or what Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Miles Sanders will have to do to combat a very good Tennessee Titans run defense on Sunday.
Well, we're going to talk about both sides, but I don't care where we start. I think maybe just go to the vanilla side of the ball with the Titans offense and the Eagles defense, and I think this is very straightforward, like most Titans games are, but when you pair them with the Eagles defense, the matchup really becomes paint by number, right? Can the Titans run the ball? And we saw last week, Lou Anarumo had a great plan for Cincinnati where they would load the box with 8 defenders on early downs and then drop into coverage on late downs. And teams are doing things differently to stop Derrick Henry, and it's led to a Titans running offense that's been average this season, quite frankly. The Eagles defense, though, 24th stopping the run, and they've played the second easiest schedule of offenses. And I think we talked about this pretty frequently now for the Eagles because they played in prime time 2 of the last 3 weeks. Philly got old up the middle. And then schematically, the Eagles are a defense that's built to stop the pass, not the run. Now, I want to see what Jonathan Gannon comes up with this week, if he's going to create a game plan specific for the Titans, or if he's just going to roll out his defense and say, hey, this is what we do, we're going to do it. And a lot of times that's what he does. You did see a situation last week where Gannon tried putting the 2 new defensive linemen on the field at the same time, in Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph. Packers still ran for over 5 yards a carry in those situations when those 2 gentlemen were on the field at the same exact time. We know Jordan Davis, while he's trending in the right direction, still out for this one. But I'm interested to see what the Eagles do defensively here, because I just don't know if they can change their stripes. And then if you do elect to load the box a little bit, yes, the cornerback position with Bradbury and Slay seems to be the strength, but they're down a couple key cogs in that secondary with Avonte Maddox and now Gardner Johnson. And the one thing that we outlined last week is, yes, the Eagles do a very good job preventing the explosive, so it makes some of their numbers look better, specifically EPA, but they've been quite soft in the way they play their coverage. So the underneath stuff can really work, and the Eagles are bottom 10 in EPA allowed per pass on throws within 7 yards of the line of scrimmage. So you can start to get some of these underneath weapons that the Titans have into the fold. And then quietly, right, you're watching Treylon Burks starting to emerge, and typically sometimes this is where rookies kind of hit the wall, but we know he was injured a little bit, so he should be fresh. He's now getting reacclimated. 11 catches for 181 yards the last 2 weeks. If he can open up some things for this Titans offense, it goes to a new level, and you're starting to see with Ryan Tannehill a little bit healthier, the offense is averaging more yards per play over the last handful of weeks. But one of the more interesting games this week from the perspective of huge matchup, but it's just very straightforward on this side of the ball. The matchup is very dependent on how large the Titans' edge is running the ball here.
I know a lot of Titans fans are going to sit there and go, you guys are idiots. A.J. Brown would have made this offense that much more explosive. If what we're seeing from Treylon Burks over the last couple of weeks is any indication, when we're talking about this trade 2 years down the road, unless the Eagles have a Super Bowl to their credit, I think the Titans will end up winning this deal if Burks can be that guy and fill in admirably. We'll see exactly what that quarterback position were to look like going forward. On the other side,
that's not how fans assess these. It's in the moment reactionary. So you are an idiot for thinking that A.J. Brown wouldn't be better for the Titans offense this week, this season. But you might be right down the road when you factor in all of the trade assets and the difference between A.J. Brown and Treylon
Yeah, we
Burks.
can see what the jury still looks like on another trade that's impacted a couple teams that we'll get to a little bit later on in the show as well. When you look at the Tennessee Titans defensively, they've been stout against the run all year. They're allowing less than 85 yards per game. It's the third best mark in the league. When you look at how they've defended running backs, giving up less than 4 yards per carry, but they've also been good against mobile quarterbacks, holding them to 4 yards per carry as well. Extremely important when you're talking about trying to contain Jalen Hurts and the element we've seen him bring to the Eagles offense over the last couple of weeks. Tennessee, second most pressures in the NFL despite blitzing at one of the league's lowest rates. They've struggled defending opposing wideouts, and that could pose a problem with their former compatriot in A.J. Brown on one side and Devontae Smith on the other. Payne, Philadelphia offensively, Jalen Hurts continues to pass some of the tests that are asked of him, but obviously this offense is very much predicated on their ability to run the football. If the Titans sell out to stop the run, can Philadelphia exploit a potential edge throwing the football against the Titans secondary, which has been the weakest link of this defense?
Yeah, I think that's the right question to propose because on the surface, this is strength on strength, right? The Eagles are the most efficient running team. The Titans are the most efficient run defense. And you look at the Titans, they've faced some mobile quarterbacks as well in Daniel Jones and Josh Allen, who are willing runners and held them to a combined 35 rushing yards. Vrabel, we know, right, is from the school of Belichick, very savvy mind when it comes to preparation and pulling out all the stops. So there's something here that I've been getting some intel on from that area, and I doubt a lot of people are talking about it. But if you told me Malik Willis's greatest contribution over the next 2 to 3 years for the Titans is in preparation for this game, acting as scout team Jalen Hurts, I would probably agree with you, especially after I've seen him throw a couple passes live. I think really your question is the right one, right? Does Philly anticipate not being able to be as efficient on the ground and turn this into a pass funnel approach from the onset? You can throw in the Titans, right? They're a below average pass defense that's gone against a below average schedule of offenses, despite having like Mahomes, Allen, and Burrow in this 12-week sample defensively. But what's interesting to me is, and I mentioned it offensively for the Titans, they're kind of trending upwards. Defense, they're doing the same thing. And these two units are kind of trending in opposite directions when you think about the Titans defensively and the Eagles offensively. The Titans pass defense since week 7 and the Eagles pass offense since week 9, just kind of like two ships in the night. A.J. Brown, it will be all the focal point here, and he's certainly chomping at the bit against his old team, and he's probably going to be a nightmare matchup for the Titans. But you just look at the last 3 games since Dallas Goedert went down in week 9. Arguably, the most important piece to the Eagles' pass offense if you injected Philly's staff with the truth serum. Jalen Hurts has really struggled throwing the ball over this stretch. Philly's 26th in drop back EPA. You can attack the Titans defense with tight ends, but there isn't a guy on the Eagles roster right now. And if the Eagles are smart, they should really try getting the running backs involved in the pass game this week because the Titans have been absolutely gashed there to running back passes. But you kind of get back here to the Titans defense. They've made some incremental improvements through the air. Started getting some guys healthy on the back end. First 6 weeks, Titans were 28th in drop back EPA allowed. Since week 7, it's 17th. In terms of yards per pass attempt allowed, Titans have seen more than a 2-yard improvement since week 7. So the secondary is playing just, a touch better. I think what's interesting here, though, Todd, is something we mentioned a little bit and had conversations multiple times this week is the price. We talk about the look ahead lines, and I kind of like to keep them in their own bucket. So sure, like you can say, hey, the look ahead was 6.5. We're now at 5.5. For me, I kind of look at where the Packers closed Sunday night and where the Titans reopened this week. And, I have the Titans on a neutral favored by more than 5 cents over Green Bay right now. So the money that's coming in on the Titans isn't overly surprising. The other thing that is worth monitoring and worth mentioning, I would say, I'm not a trend guy. I think you could probably count the number of times I've mentioned a trend on this podcast since we've done this since 2014, right? This is season 8 or 9.
That's my job as the host to come up with cliche comments and nuggets that are absolutely useless when you go to the window to make an investment.
Unless there's something that fundamentally makes sense to support it, that I fully believe in, that just makes a world of sense, I don't really mention them. But I think this trend is interesting. Since 2014, teams with just one loss entering week 12 or later, 9-23 against the spread. Philly obviously falls into that bucket. And it's easy for me to understand that trend and why it makes sense. It basically depicts a team being priced highly in the market because of win-loss record. You're paying a premium on the perceived best team in the league. But the double-sided coin to this is what happens when you're not even the first or second best team in your own conference. And that's why we've seen the Titans money both on the look ahead and early in the week at reopen prices here.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things. We talk about the market being the model of efficiency, people talking about how the road to the NFC will go through Philadelphia, and that may be quite possible when Philadelphia finishes with the best record. But when you look at the overall body of work, the roster 1-53, I'm right there with you. I don't think Philadelphia is the best team in the conference, despite their very gaudy record that they'll put on display on Sunday against the Tennessee Titans. Funny that you mentioned that, because we'll head out to the West Coast for arguably what should be the best game of the day, at least on paper, in my opinion. That'll match the Miami Dolphins against the San Francisco 49ers. And the 49ers, 4-point home favorites, 46.5 the total on this game. The Dolphins' ongoing quest to find their first division title since 2008. They'll get tested down the stretch. 5 of their final 6 games, all against opponents with winning records. And this is the definition of strength on strength. The fourth meeting in league history between a team that scored 30-plus points in each of their last 4 games and a team allowing under 17 points in each of their last 4 games. The first time this scenario has played out since 2013, and only the second time that we've seen it since 1973. A battle of 2 much-maligned quarterbacks coming into this season that are both currently clicking. Tua Tagovailoa, 11 touchdowns to no interceptions during this 5-game win streak, a passer rating of 119, allowing the Dolphins to be the current 2 seed in the AFC. They're second in the NFL in points per game during their 5-game win streak. The 5 teams, though, Miami has beat during this win streak, a combined 16, 39, and 1. For those folks scoring at home, that's a 29% win rate. Meanwhile, on the other side, Jimmy Garoppolo.
Not good, Bob.
Not good in the least. Good for win totals if Miami can get one more, but we don't need to talk about that here. Jimmy G, 7 touchdowns, no interceptions during the 49ers 4-game win streak. His passer rating at 114. The 49ers, as things currently sit, would be the 4 seed in the NFC. San Francisco, first in the NFL in points per game allowed during their win streak, but the 49ers, the 4 teams that they've beaten during their win streak, a combined 17 and 29, a 37% win rate. So clearly something will have to give in this spot. And before I even bury the lead, Payne, you want to talk about a matchup where everything is interconnected and incestual by NFL standards. This is the poster child when you talk about 2 teams that use motion at a top 3 rate in the league, and Mike McDaniel's familiarity with Kyle Shanahan, as the 2 worked on the same staff from 2011 to 2013 in Washington. They were both in Cleveland in 2014, 2015 to 2016 as a member of the Falcons, and most recently 2017 to 2021 as a member of the 49ers. And that's even before we get into all the trades and the players that have played for both teams and everything else. When you have this level of familiarity,
don't ask me. I have no idea who has the advantage.
Between 2 head coaches, how fascinating is it for you as a handicapper to go about trying to break down some of the matchups?
I caused you to audible before.
No, you didn't cause me to audible. I had a feeling where this was going before it got there, but thankfully, being the consummate professional I am, I'm able to think on my feet and pivot.
I don't know, right? This is just... Sometimes we get these matchups and you overthink them a little bit, and I think that's kind of where I am on this game. I don't know. I don't know the right answer to that question. I think we're going to see some things unfold here. And listen, you kind of hinted like we're all Dolphins fans here. We need them to eclipse 8.5 wins. That's one of our future bets we gave out in the preview series. And to this point, what I've seen from Mike McDaniel and some of the rumblings that we heard initially when this move was made from really connected football people was that possibly the brains left town. And I don't know if that's true. Like, I still really respect Kyle Shanahan. But you talk to some of the 49ers guys, and they think they're doing some things different offensively that's probably not as good this year as it was last. And what you're seeing right now from Miami, and you're spot on, right? They haven't played a great schedule recently, but Tua is your MVP right now through 12 weeks. And Mike McDaniel is your coach of the year through 12 weeks. And whether it's QBR, whether it's PFF passing grade, if you're into that thing, whether it's EPA plus completion percentage above expectation, Tua is the number 1 quarterback in all those metrics. And the simplest one that we've talked about a couple times here is the Dolphins are 8-0 in games Tua has started and finished 0-3 in games he hasn't. I don't know who has the edge here schematically. I've been thinking about this game for 2 weeks now. It's just, to me, I think when we look at this, we're going to find out what Miami actually is. This is the toughest part of their schedule. I think, all the MVP and Coach of the Year chatter can go out the window pretty quickly because Miami's got the second toughest schedule from this moment onwards, and they're a little bit beat up. And so I think this is a tough spot for Miami. And you just kind of look specific to the matchup. Like, you have your starting right tackle, Austin Jackson. He's out. Your starting left tackle, Teron Armstead, left with a pec injury last week. They're very happy it's not going to require surgery. Everyone thought he was going to be out. Teron claims he's playing this week. He's aiming to play. Who knows if he can play? Who knows for how long he can play? But the 49ers defense is starting to get back full strength. Their Armstead, Eric Armstead, looks like he's going to be back. And even with all of these injuries, right, along the D-line for the 49ers this season, they're still top 10 in pressure rate and well below average in blitz rate, and that's the combination you're looking for. You also look at some of the paths here offensively, right? It's 49ers defense second best in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency. So this has all of the makings with some of those offensive line injuries where Miami doesn't have the ability to run the ball. So this turns into this short, quick pass attack for Miami. And that really hasn't been the MO for Mike McDaniel's offense. He's actually been a little bit different than what they employed last year with the 49ers because he's a good coach and kind of shifts things based upon the skill set of his players and the strength of his players. So they've been pushing the ball down the field a little bit more, Miami, as opposed to what the 49ers offense did last season where a lot of it was yak-based. So can you push the ball downfield in a situation like this where you're potentially without your left tackle or he's far less than 100%, you're without your right tackle, you're not a good pass-blocking offensive line to begin with, and we know the issues that Tua's had sometimes when he's contacted and falls to the ground. So it's really got to be this quick, short pass attack. The other thing that you hit perfectly at the top, but it's worth kind of expounding on a little bit, is the step up in class. Since week 6, the Dolphins have played the Vikings, Lions, Bears, Browns, Texans, and Steelers defense without TJ Watt. And when you make the manual adjustment for the Steelers defense without Watt, they go from a fringe top 5 defense to a bottom 10 unit. So in that scenario, the Dolphins haven't played an above average defense since week 5. That's an average schedule of defenses. That's 27th since week 6 that Miami's faced. Now you get a top 5 49ers defense that's trending healthier. And to your point, right, there's a lot of familiarity with what you're doing. Even if you're making these subtle tweaks, even if you're doing things a little bit different with the route trees and concepts, fundamentally, to your point at the top, there's a lot of incest. So it's very difficult to gauge who's going to have the edge with the incest, even though that line does not sound right.
Well, you mentioned Tua.
There's no advantages when it comes to incest. There
never is. When you mentioned Tua, by the way, and how prolific he's been throwing downfield this year, third longest average pass length this season, 83 of 123 for nearly a 68% completion rate on throws of 10-plus air yards this season, best by any player in a season going all the way back to 2006 when tracking on some of those metrics began. Highest third down passer rating of 145.6 in a season since 1991, and he could be the first Dolphins quarterback to lead the NFL in passer rating since Dan Marino laces out back in 1984. Now, when we look at the other side of the ball, clearly the 49ers offense not going to be operating at full speed. Christian McCaffrey a little bit banged up. No Elijah Mitchell, Deebo Samuel dealing with lingering remnants of a hamstring injury. But when you're Miami and you're trying to devise a game plan, even when you have a lot of question marks in your secondary, you're still good against the run. And if there's any coach in the NFL that knows the 49ers offensive personnel better than Kyle Shanahan, it's the Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, I mean, again, this game has just been like racking my brain for 2 weeks. Anytime I kind of get away and I just start thinking about this game, and you get some good intel based upon who the two coaches are and some of the things we have access to. And so you just are waiting for this cat and mouse game to unfold. And I can't wait till it gets here because I'm clogging my brain, quite frankly. I think the familiarity factor might actually be the inverse of what people are thinking. That's kind of what I've arrived at, and it's that like Mike McDaniel was the run game coordinator for the 49ers last season. He knows the 49ers run concepts. He built them. But they're both building in counters to everything, right? Like they're both remembering back to all the conversations they've had and trying to find that tiny little sliver of information they can use to design something specifically for this week. So it's just going to be wild to watch this. So hopefully the weather is not impactful. It does look like there's a chance for this game to be real wet. So you'll have to keep your eyes peeled to the forecast there. And I hope that's not the case, because it could hinder the ability for this game to be really good. But like the 49ers, the best part of the Dolphins defense is their ability to stop the run, to your actual question at the top there. The Dolphins are top 10 in EPA per rush and rushing success rate allowed. And the familiarity with the 49ers run concept should probably help here too, and then you think about some of the injuries you mentioned. Elijah Mitchell's hurt again. CMC was seen on the sidelines dealing with a knee injury, didn't look completely healthy. Debo has been in and out of the lineup as he deals with this quad injury, and Jimmy G took a weird hit on his knee and kind of hobbled around late in that game.
No brace for
me,
Jimmy G in practice, but the one thing that's interesting about that, 49ers were pretty quick to point that out, so I do wonder if he wore a brace during the portion of practice that the media didn't have access to.
On a Wednesday, he's thrown in boxer shorts, basically. So
everybody looks good throwing in shorts, buddy.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So, for me, the path here is you want to attack Miami through the air. And it wouldn't shock me in the least that Kyle Shanahan smartly just says, hey, I'm going to come out here and I'm going to throw the ball. And that's where Miami's been vulnerable, right? Injuries have hit the secondary. Byron Jones hasn't returned. Brandon Jones has the ACL. Nick Needham tore his Achilles. Xavier Howard isn't the guy mainstream media portrays him to be in terms of true coverage skills. Certainly a ball hawk. He's a magnet for the ball. We saw it again this past week where the ball just found him and he walked it into an end zone after a fumble. But all told, the Dolphins are 25th in schedule-adjusted pass defense. And where they really struggle and have for what feels like a decade now is defending tight ends. So this has to be a George Kittle game. We can't just make him an inline blocker, even though he's great doing that. We got to target George Kittle in this game. Miami's bottom 3 in the league in terms of receptions and touchdowns allowed to the tight end position, 31st in catches allowed to tight ends per game. You want to throw it on Miami. And here's another thing that's kind of interesting to me, and it's possibly not like the best thing for the 49ers, right? We saw last week stylistically against the Saints that the best approach is you want to play man coverage against the 49ers. And I think that'll sound crazy to some when you think about the weapons, right? Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, CMC. But if you really break down the tape and you talk to all the guys that do and mesh it with the data, Debo and Ayuk aren't the best creating separation against man coverage. And Jimmy G is far better finding holes against zone. So if you look at Jimmy G's EPA against zone and 2-eye shell, he's a top 3 quarterback. Against man coverage, Jimmy's EPA dips slightly to like average, below average, and the Dolphins play a ridiculous amount of man, so that's something to consider here as well. And just this game for me, were a lot of off the cuff random thoughts, and you and I have talked about this total, and it's one of the more fun games of the week from what I've seen and heard. Even though we've seen a slight tick back downwards once it appeared Teron Armstead may try to battle this thing out for the Dolphins at left tackle. What I've seen and heard is the 49ers are the side. Let's see where the market heads. The total is just a ball of confusion from this perspective. I think the casual bettor, or even the guy who fancies himself semi-sharp, sees the Dolphins and 49ers and thinks about the offensive minds that Shanahan and McDaniel are, and it's below the key of 47. Like, over. Can't wait. And then you start to think about everything we just talked about, Todd, right? Dolphins offensive line beat up. Dolphins offense playing, a good defense for the first time since the Jets. Even the Steelers held them, in check without TJ Watt, and the Dolphins are probably unlikely to run. So you're having these short, quick passes, and Mike McDaniels knows the 49ers run game inside and out, and the 49ers weapons are a little bit dinged up, and Jimmy G's worse against man coverage. All of these things make for a quiet, contrarian under here, and then you factor in potentially some of the weather. But boy, I'm a little nervous that this could turn into a pass funnel game with neither team able to run, and that's what's kept me off the under to this point.
If I know what you know, but you know that I know that you know, what does that mean? Are we all end up in a stalemate in a prisoner's dilemma? And I think those are the kind of things that we love to watch as football fans. And let's be honest, the NFL hasn't offered that much in the way of intriguing games on paper leading up to it. We've had plenty of close finishes. We highlighted that on the Monday show, the entertainment value this league brings. But I think leading up to a game, there's not one that's been more anticipated for you and I over the last couple weeks than what we're going to see in San Francisco, knowing that, hey, if things were to break the right way, maybe it is a Super Bowl preview as well, should Miami be able to navigate through a much more rugged NFC than the road the 49ers could encounter in the NFC. Speaking of Super Bowl previews, a game that decided the AFC champion last year will be on full display Sunday afternoon with the Kansas City Chiefs. Change in venue, they'll head into Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. You're looking at Kansas City, a modest 1.5-point favorite in some shops. We'll call 2.5, more or less the consensus. This total has leaked out from a low of 50.5, 51, where it opened, out to 53. And the Kansas City Chiefs have now won 26 straight games during the month of November and December. It's the longest streak in NFL history. But when you look at Kansas City from a point spread futility standpoint, against the AFC, just 1-8 in their last 9 games. The last 2 meetings between these proud franchises, the Bengals have gotten the better of Kansas City Week 17, winning 34-31, overcame a 14-point deficit, a late game-winning field goal from Evan McPherson as time expired. Joe Burrow, 30 of 39, 446 yards, 4 touchdowns. Jamar Chase went absolutely bonkers. And in the AFC Championship game, this was an even bigger comeback for the Bengals, who were down 18. It did tie the largest comeback in conference championship history. Joe Burrow in that contest, 23 of 38, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns. Patrick Mahomes picked twice. No greater illustration of the Chiefs' struggles than the entire second half, where they were completely bottled up before they went into the half, not being able to put points on the board. Payne, this is a Cincinnati Bengals team that has been point spread darlings. They're now 16-3 against the number the last 19 games, including the playoffs. Best in the NFL during that span. They've covered 8 of the last 9. They've covered 7 straight as an underdog, including the playoffs, which is the longest active streak in the NFL. And Joe Burrow starting to get mentioned in that rarefied air from an ATS standpoint with the likes of elite quarterbacks, 27-14 against the spread, third best by a quarterback since the 1970 merger, with a minimum of 30 starts. You're a Patrick Mahomes guy. Patrick Mahomes has said all the right things about how important this game is to them to try and erase and exercise some of those demons. When you look at Kansas City's offense against the Bengals defense, do they have the pieces to exploit what Lou Anarumo does or doesn't do with his current level of personnel?
Yeah, another really intriguing matchup, and I think past us, the overwhelming majority of listeners and fans this week are keying on this one. The 2 matchups last season, when you have both the games, right? The starts and finishes were polar opposites both times. Andy Reid came out with these electric scripts and game plans, and Patrick Mahomes was virtually picture perfect in both those first halves, aside from the final seconds in that second matchup. But the Chiefs scored 28 and then 21 in the first halves of those matchups last season. And, again, could have been far more in that AFC Championship game. We know the debacle there around the goal line before the half. But the Chiefs were held to 6 total points in the second half of both games combined after those Lou Anarumo adjustments you referenced there. Unless you're in that Bengals building, you really don't know what Lou Anarumo is going to do or when he's going to drop the in-game adjustment that could flip it on its head, right? Is he going to come out from the onset in what he employed last year during the playoff game? Is he going to wait and bring something else out? It's really interesting. Now, the Chiefs offensively have been better metrically than any season except the 2018 Reid-Mahomes combination. And that's surprising, I think, to some. The offense has been electric. And really, I think when you kind of factor in, that in 2018 defenses weren't as hip to playing passing offenses, and they weren't doing some things by stacking their rosters with faster, more athletic parts, you might actually say that this has metrically been the best offense for the Chiefs, which is stunning to me. But you start to think about some things that they do offensively, and they do a very good job spreading the ball around. So you can't really key on as many guys as you once did, right? Because Patty Mahomes by nature was keying on Tyreek Hill at times. But you look right now, early downs, first three quarters, the Chiefs offense, number one in EPA per play. You look at third down, and Patrick Mahomes specifically, number one in the league converting for a first down or touchdown on 55% of third down plays. So he's really been out of this world. Now, some of the weapons for Kansas City are beat up, right? No Mecole, no Hilaire. Juju probably plays, but is dealing with the flu right now. Kadarius Toney and Jerick McKinnon are highly questionable. The Chiefs are still starting a backup guard at right tackle. But you look since week 6, the Bengals have played Andy Dalton, Mariota, Brissett, Baker Mayfield, rookie Kenny Pickett, and Ryan
Murderers
Tannehill.
row. Murderers row of elite NFL quarterbacks right there you rattled off.
And the Bengals are 21st in EPA per play allowed, 20th in EPA per dropback allowed over that stretch. So this is a big step up in class for the Bengals. Chidobe Awuzie, the Bengals' top cover corner, is out. Cincinnati has not played a passing game worth talking about since Awuzie went down. But the curveball here again is, what does Lou Anarumo do? When does he break out the rush 3 drop 8? And when he pulled that out in the AFC Championship game, Mahomes struggled, right? Completed 50% of his passes for less than 2.4 yards per attempt against that rush 3 drop 8. And you look this season, how the Chiefs are running the ball. It's been far less efficient than prior seasons. They're 16th in schedule adjusted rush efficiency. Since week 8, the Chiefs are 27th in EPA per rush, only 36% of plays, run plays of grade successful. So is Lou Anarumo going to pull out the rush 3 drop 8 from the onset and just say, hey, you knew what we did last year, you probably game planned for it, I want to see if you can beat it early on in this game, and if you can, then I'll make the halftime adjustment to something different. I just don't think we know. And I know everyone's fallen in love with Isaiah Pacheco because he's the fantasy guy now, but he's not like the most overly efficient runner. I think he's got the potential to break out. For me, he just looks choppy. It looks like he's fighting gravity. There's a reason he was benched at Rutgers. Let's see if he can actually be efficient with these runs and provide the Chiefs the ground game they need to be complementary through the air. And if he can do that, it's going to go a long way to some offensive improvement in terms of like the Chiefs being multidimensional and being able to combat a potential rush 3 drop 8 situation.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, talking about this Bengals defense, I mean, Kenny Pickett and company carved them up in the first half before they did make those adjustments, and that's what has been so great about the Bengals team. They have an offense that's more than capable of keeping them in games. Even if the defense struggles early, they're going to do things in the second half to get them back into the contest. And when you look at Cincinnati offensively, I mean, Joe Burrow right now is putting up ridiculously good numbers and to some extent flying largely under the radar. Second best passer rating at nearly 110 in the NFL since week 3. He was the 5th worst prior to that as he was dealing with the getting his strength back in the wake of the appendectomy he went through during the preseason. But he's got a better completion percentage, yards per attempt, and passer rating than Patrick Mahomes since the start of 2021. I mean, has higher passer rating than Mahomes this season outside the pocket when pressured or with 4 seconds to throw. And you look at what he's done with some of the weapons. It doesn't matter when he didn't have Joe Mixon or Jamar Chase. The Titans knew he was going to T. Higgins. They were still able to make Higgins an absolute monster, especially over the last 2 weeks with 16 catches on 22 targets for 262 yards. When you look at how he shared the ball, he should have an opportunity for success as well against the Kansas City defense that you talked about, trending up, but still having some concerns with their ability to defend the pass.
Yeah, we talked about this back in week 6, and so it's probably really important to mention here, especially in a game with the highest total on the board that's everyone's going to be watching, and I know probably not everyone remembers back to week 6, but the Bengals made a shift schematically post week 5, so heading into their week 6 game, and the light finally flickered on for Zach Taylor, and he said, I got to hand the offense to Joe Burrow, right? Give Burrow the offense. I'm horrific at my job. I just have to let Burrow do his thing and continue to bail me out. And so suddenly we have the Joe Burrow offense in Cincinnati again, which means far more use of shotgun. And we've seen that usage of shotgun increase by more than 15%. It means less running and more passing. It means less running from under center. And over the last 5 games, since this became the Joe Burrow offense, the Bengals are number 1 in early down pass rate in neutral situations. Go back to week 6, the offense was again handed over to Burrow. The Bengals are number 1 in both EPA per play and success rate. The Bengals are a positive 0.22 EPA per play. No other offense has a 2 in front of their name. 54% of the plays have graded successful over that stretch. That's 3.5% better than the second best offense in that window. So the Bengals offense is trending in a very positive manner here. Now, you kind of hinted at the Chiefs' defensive improvements. They're still below average in defensive efficiency, and Kansas City's played a bottom 7 schedule of offenses, and 2 of the last 4 games Casey's played, backup rookie quarterback Malik Willis and third string quarterback Bryce Perkins, so this is a massive step up in class for them as well. Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon are at least trending in the right direction for a return, even though it sounds like Jamar Chase could be on a limited snap count here as he works himself back into shape. And the other thing that's going wildly unnoticed by most, all of the money that was spent along the offensive line is starting to pay off for Cincinnati. Cohesion's finally starting to take some shape there. First month of the season, the Bengals were 24th in pressure rate allowed. Since week 5, 6th in pressure rate allowed. So not only are the Bengals dropping back to pass more, but the offensive line's improving greatly. I think once the Bengals, get fully healthy, this offense is going to be an absolute terror. And Cincinnati is a team that not enough people are talking about to make another Super Bowl run. There's other teams being mentioned, right? It's kind of all gravitating towards the Bills, and now Patrick Mahomes is in the MVP conversation again, and Mike McDaniel's the hottest thing since sliced bread. And the Bengals are kind of flying under the radar. So the sharpest bettors I know are thinking about the Bengals here, even though the media hasn't caught up to that. And you can kind of see that in the market with some Super Bowl pricing, where one of the sharpest shops in the world is dealing the Bengals at 9-1, and the rest of the market is firmly at 20-1. Probably worth a few shekels at that.
The interesting part about the Bengals, too, and part of that narrative, you look at their remaining strength of schedule, significantly more difficult than their division foes with the Baltimore Ravens, but sometimes that has a positive net impact when you're talking about being battle tested in that playoff mentality. And Cincinnati, as we saw last year, not afraid to go on the road and be able to make a little bit of hay, especially if the defense can get healthier. And to your point, Zach Taylor understands that Joe Burrow should get to do whatever Joe Burrow wants to maximize some of the weapons that they have at their disposal. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, one final game to get to. I don't think this requires necessarily a deep dive or your attempt to try and revolutionize the X's and O's in football. And that, of course, is the game that we'll see under the bright lights in Big D, where the Dallas Cowboys will welcome in the Indianapolis Colts. The Cowboys, a 10.5-point favorite, down a touch from when we started recording this morning at 11. Total on the game, 43.5, 44, depending on the shop. Those are the two most dominant numbers that are dotting the market right now. Kudos to Jeff Saturday for for having buyer's remorse on not using his timeouts against the Pittsburgh Steelers, a game that the Indianapolis Colts let slip away in the waning stages. They're coming up short 24-17 on Monday Night Football. Huge rest advantage for the Dallas Cowboys, having played on Thanksgiving. The Colts a much shorter week. First meeting for these two franchises since 2018. When you look at the game's biggest mismatch here, Payne, the Colts, they're 30th in points per game this season. They're 43 sacks allowed, the most in the NFL. In steps the Dallas Cowboys defense, second in points per game allowed, 45 sacks, most in the National Football League. Be easy to attack that side of the ball, but I'll, again, give you the opportunity to find the one factor that you think will determine this outcome. It may be the other side, where can the Colts do enough to slow down this Cowboys offense if they're going to stay inside the number?
Yeah, the smart approach here for the Colts is to enhance variance for as long as humanly possible and slow this game down and run it right at Dallas, where they're a little soft in the belly, and that's something we've talked about a couple times, right? The interior of that defensive line for Dallas is certainly not impenetrable. You can do some damage there. The Colts got down multiple scores Monday, so they had to go tempo. So I think Chris Ballard and the staff has been alerted, right? Like, hey, this might be at least the smart approach early on, is just slow this freaking game down and enhance that variance. But there's really one path to keeping this within the 10.5, and It's moving the Cowboys defense in the trenches, kind of being able to pick up 4 or 5 yards a pop, taking 30 seconds between snaps. I mean, Dallas is 28th in yards allowed per rush before first contact. That's a little bit more predictive than the overall rushing efficiency number, which is probably depicting a defense that's somewhere in the fringe top 10 range. But if the Colts can run, right, and they can kind of, I think, stay within this number a little bit. But if they're forced to play catch up, oof, things could snowball here, right? Like Matt Ryan's going to be a sitting duck. Indy's 31st in pass block win rate. And you look at Matt Ryan, he's done a really good job trying to get the ball out quickly, 2.6 second release time. Even with that, he's been pressuring 34% of his dropbacks, which is like well above league average. And when Matt Ryan's under pressure, he has been abysmal. So and you kind of think of that correlation to the Cowboys defense, right? Who's number 1 in the NFL by a wide margin in pressure rate, and they're in the middle of the pack in terms of sending blitzes. So they're able to get natural pressure. And so you got to be able to run the ball here. So Matt Ryan isn't forced with some third and mediums and third and longs with that offensive line pass protecting. So I think Indy has to employ that ground game and bleed the clock strategy and get a few timely stops there, and have some situations where you can hold the 3 instead of giving up 7 a drive or 2, and that's really the only path. The margins are pretty thin here. Let's see if you can get Kwity Paye upgraded. I think that's probably a little bit of a long shot, but if you can, right, like Dallas's offensive line ain't great. And if you can get some pressure there, create a turnover. I think the other thing that's kind of created some panic in the market in regards of the total is the loss of Kenny Moore. He has a shin injury from Monday night. He's not going to play. I think we know the player that Kenny Moore can potentially be. And he's been a guy that's, on the fringe of being, a Pro Bowl guy. He's operated in the slot. He's looking for a big money deal. This new defense doesn't seem to suit him very well. So you would obviously want him out there if you're betting the Colts or thinking about the under. But in terms of his play this season, he's graded out cornerback 183 out of 200. So I don't think it's as large of a loss as potentially others in the market seem to think it is.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this Colts team, they don't wow you with anything they do. Clearly, Jonathan Taylor has been a focal point in establishing the ground game that we've seen to be so effective when they can get going. But to your point, that only works if you're within a neutral game state. If you're chasing a 2-touchdown deficit, suddenly Matt Ryan having to throw to get you back in the game, a little bit more problematic and probably does not create the best recipe for success. Well, we'll see.
And you get the thought process, right? Like, you get the thought process of the initial Dallas money in that, like, the story's over, right? The Jeff Saturday story was so nice, and he went out there and got a win against the Raiders and played the Eagles tough in, like, the best spot ever. But you're starting to see the issues, right? I mean, they just got absolutely beat up on Monday Night Football, and I don't think the score was indicative of what truly transpired, if not for a couple of special teams returns setting up short fields for the Colts. And then you have the blunder with the timeouts late, and you just wonder if people in this locker room are now like, I know we beat the Raiders, but we're kind of seeing what everyone was joking about our coach, and some of those things we're seeing unfold in front of our eyes. It's like, are you going to get the buy-in here? I think the saving grace might be like, you're probably not packing it in on a nationally televised game. And I understand that, football is a physical sport, and we kind of have these conversations all the time. Like, the eye in the sky never lies, and you're putting stuff on film, and you can't not go 100% because of injury. But the belief within in that locker room has to be dwindling about Jeff Saturday's acumen as a head coach.
Belief gets you so far, but as you always say, somewhere along the way, it's productivity and it's the things that you see having to transpire on the football field that'll get you to the window, not only from a straight up standpoint, but for what we do in this world from an ATS perspective. Again, reminder, you can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Monumental, gargantuan undertaking here to get into to 6 games. The Cowboys and Colts, if it was nestled into a Sunday slate, wouldn't have otherwise made the cut. But we obviously make sure we do our proper due diligence for all games that fall in those standalone time slots. However, we do have one final piece of business to transact before we bid our listeners a fond farewell. Looking forward to a busy, jam-packed NFL Week 13. Where should we go to try and find our best investment, kind sir?
So we talked about this game at the top. I would say not at the top, but the second game we discussed. And so it'll be time-stamped up there. I won't discuss it too far, but let's go with rotation number 457, the Tennessee Titans. We'll call it +5. There's a couple 5.5s out there. If you can get to 6 for -15, I think it makes sense with the total at 44. And you're thinking about two teams that are pretty analytically savvy in terms of the Eagles going for 2 whenever they feel like it, or both teams doing it late in the fourth quarter when they would smartly do that. So if you can get there for 15 cents, 6 makes sense, but we'll call it 5 for this purpose. But we broke the game down at the top. Don't really need to reiterate it here. It's time-stamped above. Go for it. Tennessee Titans +5 best bet.
There you go. Mike Vrabel and company take us to the promised land. Take that 13-3 ATS record as a dog of 4 or more, turn it into 14-3, and we'll be able to all profit quite handsomely. Want to wish all of you, our loyal listeners, the best of luck with wherever your investments take you for a busy NFL slate this weekend. And most importantly, as always, we appreciate the interaction, you liking, favoriting, sharing the podcast with all of your friends, neighbors, family, colleagues, you name it, what have you. Anything else, Payne, you'd like to disclose to our listeners before we send them on their merry way?
No, I'll keep your rash privately.
Yeah, well, I mean, every now and again, a little bit of penicillin goes a long way to treat those kind of things. Let that be a life lesson for everybody around these parts. All right. Best of luck with wherever you go this weekend with all of your wagering pursuits. Go Team USA Saturday morning against the Dutch. Let's try and punch our ticket to the quarterfinals. But most importantly, as always, with a Tennessee Titans ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon. Hopefully we'll see you at the win.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.